There is a strange moment in the corn season when everything still looks possible. It's May 15th. The planter is rolling, the seed is treated, the hybrid decisions were made months ago. The sprayer plan is sitting in the budget like a safety net. There are herbicides ready, fungicide options lined up, insecticide thresholds in somebody's notebook, and a dozen ways to protect this crop once it is above the ground. From the road, nothing looks lost, but inside the crop, the math has already changed. Corn is not just planted into soil, corn is planted into time. And after early May, that time starts getting more expensive. Purdue's corn agronomy work puts numbers to it. Delayed planting after about May 1st can begin shaving relative yield potential. And by mid-May, that loss can move towards roughly 1% per day. Not because May 14th is magic and May 15th is cursed, but because every day shifts emergence, canopy growth, ear development, pollination, grain fill, dry down, disease exposure, and frost risk into a tighter biological hallway. And here is the uncomfortable part. No fungicide pass can buy that hallway back. A spray program can protect a crop. A planter decides what kind of crop there is to protect. Here is the argument of this episode. Planting date determines more of a corn crop's final yield ceiling than any spray program because planting date decides when the crop emerges, when it builds a canopy, when it sets its ears, how it pollinates, fills grain, and runs into heat, drought, disease, and frost risk. That does not mean sprays are unimportant. It means they are usually downstream. Herbicides protect the crop from competition. Fungicides protect the canopy from disease. Insecticides protect the plant from specific plant pest pressures. And these tools matter a lot. In some fields and in some years, they are the difference between a profitable crop and a painful one. But most spray programs defend yield potential. Planting date creates the first version of it, and if that distinction gets blurred, the whole season gets misread. Corn management has developed a familiar rhythm. Pick the right hybrid, get the planter ready, plant into decent conditions, keep weeds off early, protect the stand, watch for diseases, scout for insects, time the fungicide, manage its nitrogen, and keep the canopy alive to finish strong. That is a sensible way to think about a crop. It reflects real field experience. Nobody who has watched weeds overrun young corn thinks herbicide timing is a minor detail. And nobody who has seen tar spot eat into the upper canopy during grain fill thinks fungicides are cosmetic. Nobody who has fought cutworms, rootworms, armyworms, or any late season stalk problems thinks that crop protection is optional. So the normal answer is, it all matters. And yes, it does. But it all matters can become a lazy answer when two decisions do not operate at the same level. A spray program is mostly a defense system. It protects stands, leaf area, and grain fill from competition, pests, and disease. It is valuable because the crop is vulnerable. Planting date is different. Planting date is architectural. It places the entire corn plant's life on the calendar. It determines whether the crop has enough time to emerge, build leaf area before the longest days of the year, intercept sunlight, set potential kernels, pollinate before the worst odds of heat and moisture stress, and finish grain fill before the season runs out. That is the difference. A spray program is like a security system on a house. Planting date is the foundation, the framing, the roofline, the direction the windows face, and whether the house was built before winter. A great security system does not fix a bad foundation. And a perfect fungicide pass does not give late planted corn an extra week of June sunlight. So this episode is not anti-fungicide, it's not anti-herbicide, it's not anti-crop protection, it's anti-confusion. The planter creates the ceiling, and the sprayer protects what is left under it. Corn yield feels like a harvest outcome, but it is really a sequence. The combine sees the final answer, the plant writes the answer one stage at a time, and planting date decides where every stage lands. Start with the seed. Corn does not win just because it is put in the ground early. That is the trap. Calendar aggression is not the same as agronomy. A seed planted in the cold, saturated soil is not getting a heroic head start. It may sit, it may take in cold water, it may struggle through uneven emergence, and it may become the kind of stand that technically got planted early, but biologically, it started poorly. That is why soil conditions matter. Iowa State's spring planting guidance points to a basic idea. Corn germination becomes more favorable once soil temperatures rise above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, especially when the forecast supports continued warming. Now that sounds simple, but it is one of the most important distinctions in this whole episode. The goal is not to be early at all costs. The goal is to be early and to fit soils, because uniform emergence is the crop's first argument with itself. If one plant emerges cleanly and its neighbor comes up 2 or 3 days later, they're not really equal competitors anymore. Corn plants do not politely share sunlight because they were placed in the same row. The earlier plant gets bigger. The later plant gets shaded. The field may still look acceptable from a pickup window, but the stand has already become uneven. And once that happens, a spray pass cannot turn smaller delayed plants into perfectly synchronized neighbors. It can't protect them. It cannot rewind them. After emergence, the next job is canopy. This is where planting date starts to separate itself from almost every later input decision. Corn is a solar machine. The leaves are not decoration, they are the factory. Every new leaf increases the crop's ability to intercept sunlight. Intercepted sunlight drives photosynthesis. Photosynthesis builds sugars, and those sugars become roots, stalks, leaves, ears, kernels, and finally grain weight. That means the calendar matters because the sun is not equally available all season. A crop planted early enough into fit soil gets more time to build leaf area before and during the longest, brightest part of the year. A crop pushed later has to build the same biological machine inside a shorter runway. It is trying to assemble the factory while the best production days are already passing by. That is the part no spray program can replace. A herbicide can remove weeds, a fungicide can protect leaves, and an insecticide can knock down a pest. But none of them can add back sunlight that the crop was not big enough to capture. This is why the planting date argument is not just about days. It is about what those days contain. A day in early June is not the same as a day in late September. The light is different, the temperature pattern is different, the stress odds are different. The crop stage is different, and the value of the day depends on what the plant is trying to do when that day arrives. Next comes ear development. This is where corn gets sneaky, because yield is not built when the ears are obvious. By the time you can walk into a field, pull back husks, and see the best shape of the crop, many of the biggest decisions have already been made by the plant. Corn yield breaks down into components: plants per acre, ears per plant, kernel rows, kernels per row, and kernel weight. Those pieces are not created all at once. Plants per acre starts with planting and emergence. Ears per plant depends on stand, stress, and early development. Kernel row number and potential kernels are influenced before silking. Kernel number depends heavily on conditions around pollination. Kernel weight depends on what happens after pollination during grain fill. Planting date reaches into all of it. It affects stand establishment. It affects early vigor. It affects canopy timing, and it affects what kind of weather the crop sees while it is setting reproductive potential. Then it affects how much season remains after pollination to actually fill the kernels it successfully sets. This is the big mental shift. Planting date is not one decision at the beginning of planting. It is a decision that keeps echoing. It echoes at emergence. It echoes at V6. It echoes when the crop shades the row. It echoes when the tassel comes out. It echoes when silks are trying to stay alive, when kernels are filling, and it even echoes when the grain is still wet in October and the forecast starts looking ugly. Now, when we get to pollination, which is the most brutal part of the calendar, corn can forgive some mistakes, but it does not like chaos during pollination. Pollen shed and silk emergence have to line up. Silks have to stay receptive. The plant needs enough water and energy to turn potential kernels into actual fertilized kernels. If heat and drought stress hit hard during that window, the crops can lose yield quickly. Not because the field looks dead, not because the plant gives up immediately, but because kernel number is being decided. And kernel number is one of the hardest things to recover. A fungicide cannot move pollination to a cooler week. A herbicide cannot add a rain event. An insecticide cannot give silks better timing. Those tools can protect the plant from the defined threats, and that matters, but planting day influences when the crop enters the most sensitive reproductive window of its life. That is why delayed planting is not simply a smaller plant problem, it's a timing problem. Purdue's planting date work shows relative corn yield potential generally declines after about May 1st, with estimated losses around 0.3% per day early in May, and closer to 1% per day beginning around mid-May. Minnesota extension describes a similar pattern, roughly 0.5% per day from April 30th to May 20th, and about 1% per day from May 20th to May 30th, and about 1.2% per day after May 30th. Those numbers are not a field guarantee. Agronomy never works that cleanly. A cool August can rescue a later crop. Timely rains can make a field look smarter than the calendar said it should. A stronger hybrid can tolerate stress better than expected. A dry June can push an early field. A wet spring can make early planting a mistake if the soil was not fit. But that pattern shows the structure. Later planting compresses the runway. It increases the odds that pollination lands in hotter, drier parts of the summer. It can shorten grain fill. It could push physiological maturity later into fall. It can increase drying costs. It can force uncomfortable hybrid maturity decisions. It can make harvest logistics tighter. And it makes every later input decision work inside a smaller margin. After pollination comes grain fill. This is the part of corn production that does not always get enough drama because pollination gets the spotlight, but grain fill is where yield gets heavy. Once kernels are successfully fertilized, they became the main sink for photosynthate. The plant is now moving dry matter into the grain. Purdue describes physiological maturity in corn as arriving around 55 to 65 days after silking, depending on geography and conditions. In adapted central corn belt hybrids, black layer is often around 65 days after silking. In the northern corn belt, it may be closer to 55 to 60 days. Now place that on a calendar. If planting is delayed, silking is delayed. If silking is delayed, grain fill starts later. If grain fill starts later, the plant needs enough remaining warmth, sunlight, and leaf health to finish kernel weight before the season cools down. So late planting does not just move harvest back. It changes the quality of the grain fill window. The crop may still produce grain, but the risk shifts towards lighter kernels, wetter grain, slower dry down, higher drying costs, lower test weights, more harvest pressures, and less flexibility if fall weather turns against you. This is where the spray program comparison becomes clearer. Fungicide is usually discussed as canopy protection. In a tar spot environment, that is a very real discussion. Crop protection network trails show that foliar fungicides can reduce tar spot severity with 2 and 3 modes of action products, generally giving stronger suppression than single mode products. Under tar spot pressure, yield protection can be real. But notice the word protection. Fungicide protects the photosynthetic factory that already exists. It does not create June leaf area that never developed. It does not rebuild kernel number after stress at pollination. It does not lengthen the season after black layer is running late. That does not make fungicides unimportant. It makes them situationally powerful instead of universally magical. Herbicides deserve even more respect in this conversation because early weed competition can absolutely cost yield. Iowa State has reported that corn yield losses were minimal when weeds were controlled at 2 inches, but losses climbed as weeds were allowed to reach 4, 6, and 12 inches before removal. The longer those weeds stay, the more they steal light, water, nutrients, and early season momentum. But that reinforces the thesis instead of weakening it. Early weed control matters because it protects the same early growth system that planting date starts. It guards the crop's chance to dominate the field. It does not replace the timing advantage of planting into the right window. So here is the mechanism in one sentence. Planting date places the crop in time. Spray programs defend the crop inside that time. That is the hierarchy. The strongest objection to this whole episode is simple. You are underestimating crop protection. And honestly, that objection deserves respect because a failed spray program can be catastrophic. A field with poor early weed control can lose yield before the grower realizes how much competition has already happened. Weeds are not just little plants minding their own business. They are thieves with excellent timing. They take light before the crop owns the canopy. They pull water when roots are still building. They compete for nutrients when the crop is trying to become dominant. And they can change the light environment around young corn in ways that affect both growth behavior and field stands. Disease can be just as serious. Tar spot is the cleanest modern example because it changed the fungicide conversation across parts of the Corn Belt. It was first confirmed in the United States in 2015 in northern Illinois and Indiana, and it has continued spreading. Under favorable weather on a susceptible hybrid, it is not a little cosmetic spotting problem. It can damage the upper canopy during grain fill, exactly when the plant needs green leaf area to keep adding kernel weight. So yes, a spray program can absolutely decide the season in a specific field during a specific time of year. A herbicide miss can cost more than a planting date advantage. A disease outbreak can erase a beautiful start. An insect problem can turn a strong stand into a rescue mission. This is why the thesis cannot be planting date always matters more than sprays in every field, in every year, under every threat. That would be too clean. Agriculture is not that obedient. The better thesis is this. Planting date sets the crop's yield ceiling more consistently because it controls the crop's entire developmental calendar. Spray programs become season deciding when a specific threat is strong enough to attack that ceiling. That distinction matters. Planting date is a structural decision. Spray programs are threat response decisions. Both matter, but they do not matter in the same way. A rescue pass can stop damage. It cannot add missed sunlight. It cannot move pollination out of a heat window. It cannot rebuild kernel number after stress. It cannot lengthen grain fill after the calendar has already shortened the crop. And sprays can save a crop from losing what it has. They rarely give the crop a completely new season. If you are a row crop operator, the practical takeaway is not plant earlier no matter what. That is how people mud in corn and then blame the weather for a stand problem that they helped create. The real takeaway is build the farm so you can plant the corn acres into the best available fit soil window without gambling the stand. That is a different kind of management. It starts months before the planter enters the first field. It means planter maintenance is not just a shop task. It is yield architecture, meters, openers, closing wheels, downforce systems, seed firmers, chains, bearings, hydraulics, monitors, wiring, row cleaners. All of it matters because the planting window is short and equipment downtime is not neutral. A breakdown on April 18th is annoying. A breakdown on May 12th can be expensive in a completely different way. It means seed logistics matter. Tender timing matters. Field order matters. Labor coverage matters. Tender drivers matter. Fuel availability matters. Which fields dry first matters. Which farms are furthest away matters. Which fields can take traffic and which ones need another day matters. This is where agriculture stops looking like a simple biology story and starts looking like logistics under biological pressure. The crop wants a good window. The farm has to be organized enough to use it. That may be the hidden constraint in the modern corn production. Not just the hybrid, not just the fungicide, not just the herbicide, capacity. Can the operation physically place its corn acres into the window it budgets around? As farmers get large, equipment gets bigger, labor gets tighter, springs get more volatile, and corn soybean decisions compete for the same few good days, planting capacity becomes a yield factor. It may not show up on a product invoice, but it shows up in the field. There is also a priority decision. When the ideal window starts closing, corn acres often deserve more urgency than soybean acres because delayed planting tends to hit corn yield potential faster. It does not mean corn always goes first. Field conditions, maturity, insurance dates, market signals, drainage, local weather, and crop mix can all change the decision. But the biological reason corn gets priority is clear. Corn is more sensitive to where its reproductive calendar lands. That does not give anyone permission to plant it into soup. The goal is the earliest fit planting date with the best chance of uniform emergence, not the earliest date, not the fastest acres, not the best looking progress report, the best biological start. For agronomists, retailers, and consultants, this changes the conversation too. Do not sell July protection as if it can repair April execution. Build crop protection plans around fields that still have yield potential to protect. Use hybrid susceptibility, disease history, residue, weather, canopy humidity, scouting, and local pressures to make fungicide decisions. Use weed size, residual timing, rainfall, and emergence patterns to manage herbicides. Use thresholds and scouting for insects. But keep the hierarchy clear. The spray program should defend the crop's potential. It should not become a physiological substitute for planting execution, because that happens more than people admit. A farm can spend all winter debating fungicide products and then treat planter preparation like routine maintenance. It can spend hours comparing adjuvants and then lose a planting day to preventable breakdown. It can obsess over a late season pass and ignore whether the early season system is built to get the crop in cleanly, evenly, and on time. That is backwards. Not because sprays are unimportant, because timing is upstream. This episode matters beyond one planter and one sprayer because it reveals something larger about modern agriculture. A lot of farm technology is sold as control. Control weeds, control disease, control insects, control application timing, control rates, control passes, control variability, and control is valuable. Modern crop protection, precision tools, seed genetics, and equipment have made farms far more capable than they used to be. But biology still has a clock. Corn is still a plant trying to intercept sunlight, avoid stress at pollination, and fill kernels before the season closes. The crop does not care how expensive the fungicide was if the reproductive window landed poorly. It does not care how advanced the sprayer is if the canopy never captured enough early light. It does not care how impressive the prescription map looks if the field was planted wet and emerged unevenly. Modern agriculture can manage more variables than ever. It cannot make time irrelevant. That is the point of this episode. Planting day is powerful because it is one of the few decisions that changes the entire sequence of the crop's life. It does not influence one threat. It influences the crop's exposure to almost every threat. Plant early into fit soil and you give the crop more room to build, pollinate, fill, and finish. Plant late, and the crop can still succeed, but that margin narrows. Then every later decision becomes more important because there is less room for error. That is why a late planted field often feels like it needs everything to go right. It needs clean weed control. It needs timely rain. It needs moderate heat. It needs disease to stay quiet. It needs a long fall. It needs dry down to cooperate. And it needs harvest logistics to hold together. The crop is not doomed. It is just living with a smaller margin. And once you understand that, the whole management philosophy changes. You stop asking which product creates yield. You start asking which decision created the opportunity and which decision protects it. Those are not the same question. Corn yield does not begin with the prettiest field in August. It begins when the planter places a living system onto a calendar. That calendar decides whether the crop has room to emerge evenly, build canopy, set an ear, pollinate, and fill grain before the season tightens. Crop protection still matters. In some years, it pays clearly. In some fields, it saves the crop from a specific threat that would have taken real bushels. It works inside the season the planting decision created. That is the hierarchy. The planter sets the ceiling, the sprayer protects that ceiling, and the best operators understand that those are different jobs. What I will be watching next is whether bigger farms, tighter labor, more volatile springs, earlier soybean incentives, and higher equipment costs make planting capacity the hidden constraint in corn yield. Because agriculture keeps evolving under pressure by turning biology into logistics. And in corn, the first logistics test is still the planter.